Hello. Today's story was never told. This story is not suitable for kids. A tale is only a story unless you've seen it with your own eyes. As you might know, 70% of the world is covered by water. Even though tens of thousands of ships are in the sea and ocean every day, only 5% of the ocean was explored. This means that there are still many creatures in the oceans and sea people haven't seen. Some of these creatures, if found, will make Moby Dick look like Little Potato. Today's story was told by a fisherman. In today's story, I will call this fisherman Mr. R. Mr. R started fishing with his grandfather at age 17. During his time at sea, his grandfather taught him many things. Mr. R's grandfather taught Mr. R how to feel the vibration on the fishing net, what to eat when he gets seasick, not to flip the fish to eat the other side, and to ignore certain things. What is it Mr. R should ignore? This happened the first time Mr. R was at sea. Mr. R haven't seen land in 3 weeks. Mr. R was tired of eating fish. One day, a few hours after sun disappeared from the horizon, Mr. R began hearing things. At first, Mr. R heard something that sounded like something whistling. But then, this whistling sound got louder. The louder the sound got, the sounded like cries. This crying whistling sound went on for a while. Mr. R went out to see where this cry was coming from. But he can't see anything. His grandfather and the rest of the crew was asleep. Or at least that was what they pretended to do. As Mr. R tries to wake up his grandfather to ask him where the sound came from, his grandfather said to him seriously, "Go to sleep." As Mr. R turns to go to sleep, the sound disappeared in a sudden. Then there was total silence. The next day, Mr. R's grandfather already know what Mr. R will ask. Mr. R's grandfather told Mr. R that the sound he heard was the cry of ghosts of those who were lost at sea. The whistling sound was the whistle of the ghost ship. Some can hear them. Some can't. It's best to ignore the sound. Those who search this sound will be possessed by the ghost. In many cases, these people will starve themselves to death. Sometime, you will hear these people who were possessed speak in a language you never heard them spoke. After hearing this, Mr. R understood why his grandfather told him to go to sleep. His grandfather heard the same sound he did. Last night, his grandfather was pretending to be asleep, just to ignore the weird sound. From then on, whenever Mr. R hear this sound, he will ignores the sound and pretend to be asleep. Of course, this wasn't the only time Mr. R seen weird incident at sea. He saw the fastest of nature. There was once, as a crew was cooking fish. In the belly of the fish was a smaller fish. In the belly of the smaller fish was 2 more even smaller fish. In the belly of one of the smaller fish were shrimps. Although this happened many times, but that was the most out of one fish. There was once where one of the crew member was bored. He went fishing. As he was fishing, Mr. R saw a very interesting view. This crew member caught a fish. As the crew member was trying to pull the fish in, a swordfish ate the fish. Now the line is in the swordfish. Mr. R and the other crew members got ready to pull the swordfish into the boat. But when the swordfish got on the boat, the body of the fish was eaten by sharks. What was left of the swordfish was its head. There were also times where Mr. R caught fishes that looked like it came from space. Once, Mr. R caught a fish that had a head that looked like a human skull. Although Mr. R seen many weird things, it seems that the sea and ocean never runs out of tricks. There was one raining night, Mr. R was drinking whiskey while playing poker. In middle of one game, Mr. R felt the urge to pee. He stepped out and stand next to the railing to release his urge. As he was releasing, a blob of liquid dropped on him. Mr. R thought it was rainwater. He brushes it off with his hand. But then, when his hand touched the liquid, it felt like glue. He looks up to see where this liquid came from. There, he saw the head of a huge unknown creature. This creature was on the roof of the boat looking down at him. Mr. R was spooked. The creature opens its mouth and dived down toward him. Lucky, Mr. R's legs was weakened from the frightening scene. He fell sideways to the floor. The crew heard him fell. They came out to help him. By then the creature was gone. When the crew took Mr. R into the boat, he was shivering from fear. One of the crew gave him a shot of whiskey. He swallows the whiskey. Then, Mr. R told the crew that he saw a huge ugly creature, that looked like an eel, dive down from the roof and almost ate him. The crew said that Mr. R must have drank too much. Then they went to bed. Mr. R sat on his bed that night unable to sleep. He nearly lost his life that night. But no one believed him. From that day on, Mr. R became extra careful, especially at night. Ever since Mr. R's grandfather took him onto the boat, he spent most of his life on sea. This was just some of the weirdest things he had encountered. Thank you for listening to this story. I hope you like this video. The next short story will be about the strange places Mr. R had been while at sea. Until next time, stay safe.